reasons for people, for men, and in the right sphere of work for women of God to be leaders is that the second point on our lesson is that the work cannot be left to chance. Lesson 5 is the one we're looking for. Lesson 5. That the work cannot be left to chance. In other words, it's not just going to happen. It's okay. All of a sudden, one day, everybody looks around and everybody's working. Well, we know it doesn't work that way. That things have to be done on purpose. There has to be leadership. There has to be goals. There have to be assignments. They have to have people involved.
Yes, sir.
And if we, I've had a problem myself at times of thinking, well, people just ought to know. And things they go left undone. And so people just ought to know. Well, that may be true, but that's not the way it works. I'm not seeing the lesson on the screen. I'm seeing your email. If you can get the lesson up there, we're on page 4 from lesson 5.
Yes, sir. What point are you looking at now?
Right now, I see it looks like your quick access on your file explorer. That's what I see.
Oh, okay, sir. Well, I have the document, I have the material in front of.
Well, I don't know why it's not showing because you're controlling that end. But at any rate, you can't just think things are going to happen because they should happen. It didn't work that way with anybody throughout Bible history. Somebody was always in charge to kind of make sure things happened. And so leadership, it goes back to the people being weary and scattered, not because they didn't have a shepherd. Go to page 6 now. And we're looking at number 2 on page 6. The work cannot be left to chance. I think that's page 4. Page 4. I'm sorry, I said page 6. My mistake.
Yes, sir.
There.
We are there now.
Okay. And so God needs dependable leaders who can accomplish the work that he's given. So when you start teaching in the church and you talk about things that need to be done, I believe it's sometimes we talk about things that need to be done without talking to especially God's men about some of the things we're studying here. That if we can help men to become motivated and understand the importance of taking responsibility and doing things, and then we come up with some of the needs in the church to be met, then there has been some training or teaching to help men realize their responsibility. But you might ask the question, how do you think things would go in our country if people just thought they were going to get done by everybody else? Well, they wouldn't happen. There has to be some organization and some motivation. I made a little, put a little story back here on page 6, and just kind of make a mental note. We'll get to that before we dismiss today. But well, since you're moving, go ahead and go over there and let's look at that story, and then we'll come back. That there's this story about 4 people named everybody, somebody, anybody, and nobody. And there was an important job to be done, and everybody was sure that somebody would do it. Anybody could have done it, but nobody did it. Somebody got angry about that because it was everybody's job. Everybody thought anybody could do it, but nobody realized that everybody wouldn't do it. it ended up that everybody blamed somebody when nobody did what anybody could have. Now, just think about what that's saying. It's like, well, I'm just assuming these things are going to be done. And the thing is, if there's something, here's I think a point, go back over here now to point number 2, not leaving things to chance. Sometimes as a preacher, there may be some things that have to be done and you think somebody else ought to do it, but it needs to be done right then, and you go ahead and do it. And I would encourage you as a preacher to encourage the men to get together and the whole church get together at times and talk about some things that have to be done. And we'll talk more about that later. Right now, we're looking at principles. So if God's work is left to chance, nothing's going to happen. So God needs dependable leaders who can accomplish works and get them done. Number 3, the thinking about this, go back to what you said, Brother Solon, that it seems like a lot of church members think, well, it's the preacher's job to evangelize. There is a measure of truth in that. But going back to what we were saying earlier, if the preacher was the only one to evangelize, there wouldn't be much done. Things just, and it kind of goes back to things being left to chance. And to kind of help with the idea of other people being involved in evangelism, look at Acts chapter 8. And in Acts chapter 7 is where Stephen was stoned to death. And a man named Saul we see in verse 1 that he was in hearty agreement with putting Stephen to death. This was before Saul was converted. But I want you to notice the latter section there of Acts 8. Read Acts 8 and verse 1.
Now Saul was consenting to his death. At that time, a great persecution arose against the church which was at Jerusalem, and they were all scattered throughout the regions of Judea and Samaria, except the apostles.
And so the other people were, out preaching and teaching. The apostles stayed in Jerusalem because they needed a place to work from. So you see that they're scattered throughout the regions of Judea and Samaria. Now read verse 4.
Sorry, sir, I did not get that.
Read Acts 8 and verse 4.
Okay, sir. Therefore, those who were scattered went everywhere preaching the word.
Now, in verse 5, we see a note here that Philip went down to the city of Samaria and was preaching. And if you go back to chapter 6, you have this problem of these Greek-speaking widows in the church, in early church, being neglected. And so the apostles had the people to choose 7 men who were to meet certain qualifications. And you see in verse 3 of Acts 6 that, brethren, select from among you 7 men of good reputation, full of the Spirit, wisdom, whom may be put in charge of this task, that is, taking care of the neglected Greek-speaking widows. And we know that when you get over here to Acts chapter 8, it says those who were scattered whenever we're preaching the word. And then the next verse said, well, Philip went down to Samaria. Yes, it was primarily men who were doing this. But what is a preacher? In a sense, it's just a man who wants to share the gospel with people. I think we have kind of done a disservice to that role, in the sense that the man in the pulpit, Jesus didn't have a pulpit. Philip didn't. Philip went down to another place to share the gospel. And I find it hard to believe that there weren't some women there helping. Now, Philip was leading, he was doing the preaching, and he was preaching, but a person who has a spiritual mind should want to share the gospel. Any person who knows the gospel and loves other people should learn how to teach others. If all this is left up to just the preacher, he can only reach so many people. He's just one person. But, you know, to think about it, there are a lot of people in the church who could teach others if we would just train them to do so. But lost people are out there. They're without hope. They're without the gospel. And they need guidance. Jesus took fishermen, he took a tax collector, and then others that did other just ordinary people, and taught them the gospel so they could teach others. So the first gospel sermon was taught by a fisherman in Acts chapter 2. Matthew wrote the first gospel. Before that, he'd been a tax collector. So they learned how to teach. Anybody can do that. You know, I think we've placed so much emphasis on the man in the pulpit. We've come to think that they're the only ones that can do this, and it's just not so. Number 4, the Lord expects you to lead. Leadership is based upon, not upon what you say, and upon what you do. And whether we like it or not, the Lord expects each member of the church to say and do those things that will bring glory to him. And think about this. Go back to, I want you to look at something here. We're talking about getting the Lord's work done. Sometimes people will use the example of the women going and telling the apostles that Jesus had been resurrected, and they'll take that and say, see, women can be preachers. All they did was deliver a message to the apostles. They weren't standing in a pulpit. They weren't teaching over men. They were just saying, look, we saw Jesus, he's been resurrected. And, and Jesus sent them to go tell them about it. And so the point is, that a woman can't be a pulpit preacher, but a woman can say, they could give a tract to somebody. They can teach another woman. They're learn how to teach. This is a good goal for you. Learn how to teach the church, how to teach people. Study this. Look into it deeper. And set the example. If we don't set the example as preachers, then people are going to say, well, why should I do it? The preacher doesn't do it. And they'd have a good reason to some degree. If Jesus hadn't done it, he certainly wouldn't have motivated the apostles to do it, but he showed them how to do it. Now, the next one. Yes, sir.
I wanted to, I could be wrong, but though the Bible doesn't say it, it seems as if it implies that Lydia was the one who started the church at Philippi when Paul preached to her. So she accepted the gospel. But I do not have account that after her at Philippi, other people had, accepted. And she would have invited Paul now to join in our worship, I believe, into her house. But The other Christians that were there, I tend to believe that she was the one who taught them. I don't know
I'm
if
not
we could
I'm
just
not
look at that.
sure. I'm not sure. You're talking about Lydia.
Yes, sir.
Um, Lydia asked them to stay there for a while so they could be taught more. I do not believe Lydia, after Paul left, that Lydia would have been a preacher, but certainly she could have invited people. They would have needed a man preacher. The Bible teaches that the men are to do the preaching, but we
Okay.
have to be careful and not carry that too far, um, further than the scriptures would take us.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Um, that's a good point. Um, so when you think about let me just throw this in here for a discussion. Um, what could a woman like Lydia do? Kind of bringing that up. This is in Acts 16 that um, that you see in verse 15 that um, verse 14 that Lydia was a worshiper of God and she was listening to Paul preach. She heard him. And we see the Lord opened her heart to respond to the things spoken by Paul. And when she and her household had been baptized, she urged them saying, if you have judged me to be faithful to the Lord, come to my house and stay. And she prevailed upon us. And so, but the next thing is they got put in prison. But later, I want you to notice something. Now, that was in Philippi, right?
Yes, sir.
Now, look over here in Philippians chapter 1. Somewhere along the way, elders and deacons were established in that church because Paul addressed in Philippians 1 all the saints in Christ Jesus who are in Philippi, including the overseers and deacons or bishops and deacons. And so whatever Lydia did, she would have worked within whatever sphere that God would want her to. Paul would have instructed her about that. But you
Yes, sir.
can see that, they did, Paul and Silas, they did go back and visit some of those churches and they appointed elders. And so she could have played a role in it. They
Yes,
may
sir.
have
At
met
least.
her house, may have met in her house for a little while.
Yes, sir.
So,
At least.
so these are, but that's an important point that a woman can play a certain role without usurping authority over a man.
Yes, sir.
You know, now that good point. Now, um, look at number 5. Why should we should lead on page 5 here? Because of the results. Consider the rewards of being a leader for the Lord's cause. There are personal blessings and satisfaction enough to motivate a person. It makes you feel good. It would make you feel good to see results come from your actions. And we don't do it for personal gain, but certainly there's a measure of joy that a person has from teaching and seeing the results of it and taking responsibility. All the glory goes to God, but results will come. And I'm thinking results won't come if we don't do anything. And I think it's important to recognize that we put forth an effort to make things happen in the church. If it's evangelism, if it's developing the local congregation to maturity, if it's helping people personally develop, um, things don't happen when we think they should necessarily, but in time, good results come. Think about this. When Jesus started working with Peter and James and John and all these guys, they had a long way to go. And Jesus spent a lot of time with them. But look at the results that Jesus got from taking these men and molding them and shaping them and developing them and helping them understand his purpose and mature. And then when he went back to heaven, he left some prepared people. And those are the long-term results. Number 6, because of the times, we are facing a lot of challenges in our world. Just one particular point. More and more young people, and I think a lot of it has to do with the internet. More and more young people are involved in pornography. They're spending an awful lot of time playing video games and watching videos and movies. More and more young people are becoming atheists, and it's just a growing problem. And so those are some of the things we're challenged with, and it takes action on God's people's part to do something. You know, we're right at almost 8 billion people on this earth. And again, we got mass communication that brings the world into our, not just our living room, but our personal computer, our smartphones. And these things can be good, but a lot of evil goes on with technology. When you start preaching, you're going to be preaching to people who spend a lot of time going to places on the internet they shouldn't be going. When you try to teach people in the world, people are walking around like this everywhere they go, and they're holding that phone. They're in the car, they're walking, and they live in that world. And that's a challenge on our part. And so, and then the older people are not getting married, they live together. And so it's a tremendous challenge to take on the world with the gospel, but it can be done. There are a lot of good answers for being a leader. These are just a few, but I'm going to give another assignment, and I would like to have this turned in by the time you do the final exam.
Yes, sir.
And there are 2 things in this assignment. I need this in maybe in as many words as you can use to give a good explanation. Number 1, why did you decide to go to Jamaica School of Preaching? Why? You can say, why I decided to go to Jamaica School of Preaching. And I want you to explain that. The second one is, what do you hope to gain from going to attending Jamaica School of Preaching? So why did you go, and what do you expect to gain from it? And the reason I'm doing that is this is part of your development as a mature individual, and why you choose to make a lot of decisions in your life. Because you'll be making them. You're single. Sometime you're going to think about getting married. Why do I want to marry this girl? You know, what am I expecting out of this marriage? And that's different, but it's still, you know, as time goes on, these kind of questions. So Brother Ian didn't hear this. I'm going to go over it with him very quickly. On pages 2 and 3, there are some negative reasons for not being a leader, reasons not to be a leader. And the assignment is find some scriptures to go with these and turn those in. That'll give you some research. And I need that by the end of this trimester. If you get it sooner, that's fine. If you want to have it by next week, that's fine. but I need some scriptures to go with these. And then the answering those two questions. Why did you choose to attend Jamaica School of Preaching, and what do you hope to gain from it? And I think that's a good question for you to think about. What am I going to do?
Excuse me. So I'm supposed to put why the assignment is I should make an essay on why I decided to go to the School of Preaching.
Yes.
Okay, and the other one is I officiated at a funeral today and I'm still at the building, so the internet came and went. I didn't get the first part of the assignment.
Okay, on these two questions, Brother Ian, that I just mentioned, why you chose to attend the school, and the other is what do you hope to gain from going there? What do you hope to get out of it? Okay. That's one assignment, those 2 points. And the other one is from pages 4 and 5. We have points here, and I didn't write all this lesson, but any of these points, I'm sorry, my error there. Pages 2 and 3. Pages 2 and 3. Put some scriptures with those negative reasons. See what scriptures you can find. And since you weren't here, I kind of combined on the top of page 2 there, I combined numbers 1 and 2 because they're basically the same.
Sir.
Yes, sir.
If possible, I would ask you please to write the instructions in an email and share it with us. Like, for example, Brother Roy is not here. Sorry, sir.
Okay. I can do that. Well, yeah, Brother Roy's not here.
Yes, sir.
I don't know how to deal with that when somebody doesn't come to class and they don't tell me why, but I can do that.
Yes, sir. I'm not sure what's going on, but Brother Roy has not joined class since this morning.
No, I don't know where he is. And the next, we have today's class and 2 more this trimester. And then our, if I look at my calendar here, the next, the exams will be on the week of April 4th, which will be on a Wednesday. So we have today, the 22nd and the 29th for classes, or today, the 23rd and 30th for classes. And then the exam will be the week of the 4th. So we got 2 more classes after this. Study all these lessons. There may be questions that come from on the final exam that may come from material we started with. Just go over those things and try to get the best out of it you can. You're going to have to study the material, but if you want to be a successful preacher, you're going to have to do a lot of study anyway.
Yes, sir.
It's hard work, but it pays off. So I will send an email about these assignments for you, and that's all I have for today.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
And good to see both of you brothers, and I hope you have a great Wednesday evening.
All right, sir. Thank you very much. Same to you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay. Sorry for a funeral today.